This podcast is brought to you by the OBSBot Tiny 2 Lite. Use the offer code below to save 5% on the OBSBot Tiny 2 Lite at either Amazon or their website. And this podcast is also brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Use offer code Broken Silicon to save 25% on all Microsoft products. And then also this podcast is supported by Coswheel and their CT20 e-bike. Support Moore's Law is Dead by purchasing an e-bike through the link in the description below. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I'm joined by somebody who came on about a year ago. I believe your channel was pretty new, actually, back then when you came on, but I really enjoyed our conversation. And so, I imagine there's some people who maybe haven't discovered you yet, too. So even if they listened to the last episode with High Yield, which I recommend you do, of course, please introduce yourself again. Tell people what you do professionally and what you do on YouTube.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So my name is Max. As Tom just said, I run the YouTube channel High Yield, which is a pretty niche semiconductor chip analysis hardware technology channel. It's becoming less niche over the year. I remember last time you also opened by saying that I just crossed 10,000 subscribers last time we speak. Now I'm close to 50,000, which is actually insane if I think about it. Like 50,000 is honestly, sometimes I just still can't wrap my mind up. This is my hobby. I'm not a full-time YouTuber. I'm a business consultant. I know it's a pretty broad term, but I'm a business consultant in my day job. I'm mostly in the government sector in Germany here. And that's also my background. But I've been a hardware nerd for so long that at some point I basically had to put myself and my thoughts out there. And interestingly, some people actually enjoy it. So here we are. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, of course. And, I've probably asked you this the last time you were on. I'm looking at your YouTube channel right now. At least the last video, or the first video, or should I say, the oldest video that you have that is at least still up is the Valve Steam Deck AMD Van Gogh design analysis video. I'm curious, what made you put that out? Because mine was a video, my first video that I put up was one where I was like annoyed that people said there was going to be a GDDR6 version of Vega. And I'm like, there won't be, you know? And I don't know why it was that video, but that was the one where I'm like, I've got to say something, and no one's listening in the comment sections. What made you do that one first?
Honestly, Valve, I think Valve is a company who does like these stealth drops. Like there wasn't a huge announcement campaign. They just basically said, well, here's the Steam Deck. And I looked at the chip inside, and to me, in the beginning, it was really odd. Why use the older version of Zen back then? Zen 3 was already available, and not just recently. It had been available for a while now. And they used the older Zen 2 CPU cores, but the new RDNA 2 GPU architecture. And to me, it didn't really make any sense when I first looked at it. Like, why these differences in GPU and CPU IP? And then I thought about it, and then I kind of thought I figured out why AMD and Valve, and I mean, by now we know there's another company, I think Magic Leap, they use it for their alternate reality glasses. Why they build it that way, the reason behind that. And I thought it was really interesting to me, and that's why I made a video. And thinking myself and my mom would maybe watch it. And then the next day I had 100 views, which is really crazy for the first video. And I think 2 subscribers. And I've been making videos ever since.
Yeah, I remember those days for me were early 2019. I think my first one got a couple hundred views, or it got more than 100. And then I remember I had 10 subs, and I would be excited if I got 1 subscriber a day. But simply because, to be honest, I was surprised anyone even found my video, right? But the algorithm does put it out there. And the Steam Deck's an interesting one. I mean, I love talking about it because that's an interesting one to look at. What you don't need any leaks. You can just kind of look at it and read between the lines and go, "This was probably meant for the Microsoft Surface. They didn't want it, so it didn't come out when it was supposed to." Also, at the same time, AMD didn't really design or didn't really have the money to design different CCX sizes. They were like 4 for Zen 2, 8 for Zen 3.
Definitely.
So they couldn't have used Zen 3 unless they wanted to make it bigger, and Zen 3 cores are bigger than Zen 2. So it was an interesting time to analyze things. It's getting a little less fun in some ways now, I would say, because there are so many possibilities that it's a little harder to look like you have a galaxy brain, because they can do whatever they want, and they are designing all different types of CCX sizes at AMD right now, to where there's not as much of a they have to do this. They can kind of do anything now. They have the money to.
Yeah. Back then they were focused. They had like probably only one really core team working on most of their architectures, and they didn't really have the funds to be fancy and experiment. And that's how AMD had this very streamlined product and this product lineup from like one core basically, and scaling it up with chiplets and reusing it as much as possible, which is actually what got them to where they are now. And I think the important thing is to, use your new resources and experiment more and have more cores and more layouts, but also try to not forget your old ways, like why you became so successful. I feel like that's important for AMD to stick to their guns a little bit.
I think they still kind of are in many ways. And the reason I know, or the thing that I would point to the most for me being sure they still are acting in kind of an underdog way, is that people are mad at them a lot of the time because they aren't doing more. They canceled. That was one of the things we talked about a year ago. High-end RDNA 4 was canceled.
Yeah.
Like, they're choosing not to do more than they can afford to. There's still only, like, if you compare the amount of APUs they're making on laptop this year and into next year, we have Strix Halo, Strix Point, Kraken, I believe, Escher, and I think there might be one below that or something. So like 1, 2, like that's a handful of different APUs now. That's not nothing. But if you think about Intel, they're going to have at least two or three versions of the Arrow Lake mobile die. And then they're going to have Lunar Lake, and then they're going to have Panther Lake kind of leapfrog in there. I think there's still a lot of people that go, well, you're still not making really more than Intel in laptop. Why can't you make all these different graphics things as well and all this other stuff? I wonder what you think about how, I think it's still clear AMD is trying to balance doing what they know they can well, not overextending themselves, with the fact that they have so much more money and can do so much more. Do you think they should be trying to do much more yet still, or do you think the rate of expansion is probably the right amount?
Honestly, if you look at AMD as a company, and you just focused on the APUs and CPU side, but there's the Radeon side, which is much more than just gaming Radeon. If you look at CDNA 3 and all the MI300 series, they're really intricate designs. They're a lot more complex than even Blackwell. And I feel like AMD, even though they have a lot more money, they do basically trying to be Nvidia and Intel at the same time, which needs more coordination. You have more things to worry about, more things to consider, where to put your engineering resources. And I'm pretty sure it's the same thing with Nvidia right now. It's with AMD. If you have the graphics architecture engineering teams, you want them to focus on your professional AI products and not on your RDNA SKUs. So maybe some of the reasons we've seen cancellations or delays, nothing is officially confirmed, but that's what it looks like, is that AMD is focusing on other areas like most other companies. That's something that I noticed at Computex. Like, everything is AI. Like, literally all the companies. I went to the Gigabyte booth, and I'm like, okay, what GPUs are there? No, it's AI. It's like Blackwell server racks, AI GPUs, AI chips, and I'm like, okay, is this really Gigabyte? Where am I? And I felt like this in many places there.
And so so you think maybe people that is what you're kind of leading towards saying, is that people that wish AMD would do so much more, perhaps they fail to see that they're competing with so many companies
Oh
and that
yeah,
they actually
I
are
kind of
doing
avoided
much more.
the direct answer. Yeah, I feel like AMD is already putting out a lot of chips, and I know everyone wants something different. Like a lot of people just want CPU power, and they just need a graphics unit in their laptop just to render a picture and maybe to support certain codecs. And then, of course, a lot of people who like, I want a really beefy GPU in my SoC, so I don't have to use a dedicated GPU. And I mean, if you're a gamer, that's basically the holy grail. You want a really powerful GPU, but then with that, you also need a fast memory system. And I understand why people want a lot more products, and they want to have more possibilities to choose between different setups. But I feel like right now we're actually, even with Intel and AMD, and I mean the ARM revolution that's coming, we're in a pretty good place when it comes to notebook competition in notebooks and laptops.
Yeah, and I think I'm just now thinking of this. Like, I think from AMD's perspective as well, I think they're looking around and they're going, okay, NVIDIA, I don't know if we'll be able to climb that mountain in this decade, but we're taking them on. We are taking some AI market share. We're doing well in server, so that's going well. Could be going better. And at the same time with Intel, and we just doubled notebook sales last quarter. We are crushing it. So, well, it might be maybe an armchair general might want us to try to conquer everyone at once. I think what they see the end of the light of the tunnel, and they're like, we feel like we've kind of beat Intel. The only thing that would make us lose is if we screw up. So if we just keep a little bit, taking more market share here and there, we're done. We see the end of the tunnel. Let's just make sure we don't get in our own way. I have a feeling that's how they're thinking right now, especially when they look around and see so many companies invest billions into some product that doesn't go well, and then they're done. And it's happened to a lot of companies recently.
Yeah, AMD surely got the foot in the door, and they know that. And I mean, if you look at Intel, how long they were able to still compete with AMD, even though AMD had the superior products in servers for quite a few years, because Intel had such a large install base, and they still have a really large install base in servers, and they had a huge OEM network for laptops where basically every year they would put out dozens of new Intel designs based on the new Intel chip, and it was basically an automation. And because Intel had such a huge footprint in the entire server and laptop market, it took AMD a long time of offering the superior products to actually be in a position to really compete with Intel. And I think right now we're at a point where AMD starts to get the market percentage where they know, okay, right now we're in a position where we also have the footprint that's required to basically stay in the market, even if something happens. And AMD realizes we're getting there, we're getting the design wins in our laptops, and we get the market share in the servers. And if we just continue executing in these areas without hiccups, then it's basically...
It's a sure thing.
Yeah, it's a sure thing. And
so I'll bet on the sure thing that takes 5 years than gambling on winning everything in 2 years.
And Lisa Sun knows that. And she's
and they
kind
of tried that in the past, and it didn't work out if you think about it. Well, let me ask this question here from Chris Rich. What's the biggest positive surprises you've seen from CPUs or GPU launches in the last year or so? And then also, what's the biggest disappointments? And it's funny because the last time you were on, I think, was actually really good timing. It was right after we had confirmation, at least from my perspective, the top RDNA 4 was canceled, and right before all of the major launches, but we basically knew enough to be dangerous about them.
Yeah.
You know, Meteor Lake, Blackwell, Zen 5, and now here we are. Lunar Lake's announced, detailed in some detail. Meteor Lake spin out. Zen 5's pretty, I would say, fully detailed, but mostly detailed. Of all of the things that not have just launched, like Meteor Lake, but have been announced over the past 10 or so months since you've been on, what's been the most positive for you and also the biggest disappointment?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about timing, and it's really interesting because if you look at GPUs, if I just look at the desktop GPUs, I mean, they're both older than 10 months. But if you look at the most up-to-date AMD GPUs, RDNA 3, it's not a failure, but it's not amazing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not.
I agree.
And
I think people thought one or the other, right? I think it didn't live up to, well, the performance they said it would be at first. Although it has gained some performance back with drivers. I don't think enough for me to say they didn't mislead us a little, but it's not terrible. And some people act like it's terrible.
And there's some newer games where actually RDNA 3 starts to gain some ground on RDNA 2. But it wasn't a flawed hit. It wasn't an amazing architecture, like where you would say, wow, it was okay. I was a little bit underwhelmed, but it was okay. And especially compared to Ada Lovelace, like I know Nvidia's strategy and pricing. I mean, everyone knows it's not customer friendly, it's not gamer friendly. But there's no question the RTX 4090 still is the most powerful GPU by a mile, and it has been ever since it launched. But there's nothing really new going on. And if you look at CPUs, I mean, Intel 14th gen was just a simple refresh. I'm pretty sure that it's just the same dies. They didn't even do a new stepping. It's just
I'll raise my hand and say that was definitely a disappointment to me.
Yeah.
And I did not have high expectations, but it what, 2% better than last gen? It was ridiculous.
Yeah. And I honestly, this question, which was the positive and the worst experience in the last 10 months or year, honestly, for GPUs and CPUs, there's nothing that comes to mind in both areas really, because there hasn't been really any new things to talk about. What I would say the most surprising to me is it's 2024 and AMD is still releasing new CPUs for AM4, which is amazing. Like AM4 has been the platform with the longest support ever. And I mean, I'm using AM4 and I started with a Ryzen 5 2600X. I upgraded to a 3600, which wasn't really needed back then. I just wanted the chiplets and the 700 because it was really interesting to me. I just basically a little bit of a side upgrade. And now I'm running a 5800 X3D. And it's perfect for me. And in the same time, AMD confirmed that AM5 will be supported until, what did they say, 2026 plus, 2027?
I think they basically said 2027, if not literally,
And that makes me think there's a pretty good chance Zen 6 will still run on AM5.
I am told, just for everyone listening, Zen 6 will be on. And the question is if Zen 7 will be.
Yeah. And I mean, even if Zen 7 won't be, that's 3 generations. And I mean, really 3 generations, not just slight changes. It's Zen 4, Zen 5, and Zen 6. And we will see some new releases after the initial release of Zen 6. So that's the most positive aspect, that we have sockets, good sockets with long-term support. And I honestly hope that Intel will go a similar way, not just once and done or 2 generations, but maybe this time with the new LGA 1851.
The initial plan for LGA 1851 was a full Meteor Lake desktop launch that was actually supposed to happen, I think, at the end of last year. Of course, it never did come close to that. Followed by Arrow Lake a year later, followed by Arrow Lake refresh a year, but should add more cores like Raptor Lake did to Alder Lake a year after that. And I don't remember, of course, this is old info by now, and it's changed so much. But I just think it's worth pointing out that it did seem like initially they planned to have at least 3 decent upgrades on one socket. So I don't know anymore, though, because now Arrow Lake seems to be coming out very late. Meteor Lake never came to desktop.
Yeah.
I think I heard, this is months ago that I heard this, though, that there's some discussion if Nova Lake will. But from that perspective, I would say I think the best we're going to get is 2.5 or so, depending on what you count as a generation, Arrow Lake, Nova Lake on 1851. I'm wondering if you think that's good enough. I mean, it's certainly an improvement over before, or if you think that they should be striving to do even better than that.
Honestly, I think anything than just 2 generations and then it's done, or like what we had basically during the years of Intel's domination, where even the sockets didn't really change, where there's like C170 and C270 and C370, and basically they're the same thing. And then there's some mods where you can use the new
Yeah, people even
CPU.
modded it to make it work. That was completely arbitrary and stupid.
And I mean, I understand if you have a monopoly and basically everyone who knows what they're doing is buying the Intel CPU because AMD can't compete. Of course, you want to make the extra money by forcing them to buy a new chipset, a new motherboard every time they basically upgrade. So it's not nice. It makes sense from a business perspective, but I really hope those days are gone. And I think Intel knows if they want to compete with AMD. And we're also at a point where Ryzen as a brand actually has a lot of recognition, and Intel is just switching to their new Core Ultra branding, which doesn't really have the backup that the i7 branding had. I mean, we have i9s for a while, but i7 for many is still the pinnacle. And if Intel is changing their branding to something new, and AMD is at the same time in a position where Ryzen actually has a really good standing, not only for gaming, but for CPUs in general, I think that Intel hopefully knows they have to focus more on supporting on other surrounding things for a CPU and having a good socket and longevity in supporting the socket for a longer time than just 2 years. I think that's really valued in the community, and I really hope. I think fingers crossed. Yeah.
Well, and I think this was something I talked about in some podcast or video a year ago, and I was like, yeah, we did a whole die shrink on LGA 1851 longevity, I believe, a few months ago on Moore's Law's Dead, and I couldn't help me talking to Dan come to the conclusion that like now that AMD, and this was months ago, so this was when we assumed AM5 would last to 2027. Now we know it should officially. Like that, AMD had these growing pains when they launched Zen 4. DDR5 was expensive, new motherboards, so they're going to be expensive, and that slowed its initial sales. But that's done. The motherboards are pretty much where you'd expect them to be priced. RAMs, the DDR5 is becoming cheaper than DDR4. And the bugs have been worked out of the BIOSes, and all the motherboards are just on store shelves. You don't need to pay expensive shipping for them to arrive. They've been sitting there. You can get it now.
The new ones won't be out probably for the Zen 5 launch. Maybe some.
I think it sounds like they'll want them out for the X3D launch at the end of the year, probably. But you don't need them. Just like when Zen 2, I believe, launched, you could still get one of those older motherboards early and do that. And so this time around, Intel, I don't know how Intel convinces you to go to a new platform that will cost more unless they tell you this will last you as long as AM5, because people have a choice now, and the AMD choice isn't expensive anymore. And it was last gen. It is not this gen. And I think they'll fall into the same trap that AMD fell into with Zen 4. It's not just that they should support Intel Nova Lake, they need to tell us they will now. So that we know ahead of time, especially because I think it's clear that Arrow Lake will not have a huge performance advantage over Zen 5. Could it win? Maybe. But I don't think it's going to be like Alder Lake over Zen 3, where it was a clear win. And you need a clear win to get people to pay more money. So I'm probably just preaching to the choir here, but I'm guessing you agree, like Arrow Lake probably won't be a huge win in performance, even if it does win. And if people are going to spend more money for it, they need to know that they're buying into a platform that will last a long time, or that could kind of kill their momentum, even if it is stronger.
Yeah, I feel like there's a really good competition right now in the x86 CPU market. I mean, Zen 5 looks good, Arrow Lake looks good. There's right now, as you said, there's a possibility for both to win, quote unquote.
But again,
maybe
win,
some in one
really
area, maybe the other one. But it's not looking like one will just outperform the other one by a mile. That's from what we can gauge right now. And as we talked about before, since both brands are currently at a level where there's not much difference, you have to offer the same support as your competition. If you're Intel and they say, well, you can get Arrow Lake and maybe an Arrow Lake refresh, but we cannot promise anything else. And AMD says, well, you will get Zen 5, you will get Zen 5 X3D, you will very likely get Zen 6 and probably Zen 6 X3D or whatever the X3D successor version of Zen 6 will look like. And then people who are on the fence will be like, well, if I get more longevity, more support, and I mean, the thing is, AMD already showed that they can do that. If it's just words, then it's something else. But AM4 showed that AMD can and will do that, and so people have more trust in when AMD says, "Well, we've supported until 2027," and that's something Intel has to keep in mind for sure. And I'm pretty sure they know that.
I would hope they do. That's going to be one of those things to watch, where if they don't announce that, I'll ask, I mean, have they learned anything? And same thing for like Zen 5 pricing, for example, which from what I've seen, it's going to be aggressive pricing. But if they were to launch at the same pricing as last gen, despite costs coming down and competition, that would tell me, oh, AMD really still hasn't learned anything either. So now I have to call into the question if they've learned anything over here, because they haven't learned this. Have they actually learned this other problem is a problem still? This piece of content is brought to you by the OBSBot Tiny 2 Lite. The OBSBot Tiny 2 Lite is a 4K webcam with AI-powered capabilities that has an ultra-large half-inch CMOS sensor, which allows for excellent color performance, sharper pictures, and more vivid videos for the user. And it achieves exceptional imaging in both dim and glaring lighting conditions, lets you record in upside-down portrait or horizontal orientations, and even has auto-zoom and auto-tracking features that you can control by gesture. That's right, the OBSBot Tiny 2 Lite can accurately and fluently track targets to keep a person or multiple people in focus throughout a video. And I genuinely do recommend this product. I've been impressed with their products since I started working with them a year ago, and believe it or not, I was forced to hastily throw together a backup recording system a week ago, and I actually used their camera for the last Broken Silicon. None of you seem to notice that I was using a camera that cost a fraction of the price of what I usually use, and that means it does generally perform like one that costs way more in many scenarios while having all of these extra features. It's just a USB webcam. So if you are interested in this product that I genuinely recommend, follow the links and directions in the description to get the best price possible, and also, of course, to support Moore's Law is Dead. Using the offer code helps the channel a lot, and even just clicking on the links helps the channel too. So check out the OBSBot Tiny 2 Lite, a product that genuinely has impressed me today. But yeah, speaking of learning from mistakes, though, I got to bring up Meteor Lake here because I'm surprised you didn't mention that, because I'll speak for myself. I was very disappointed in how Meteor Lake turned out. And I mean, I don't think there's any way they intended to have something come out late that doesn't beat the competition in efficiency, that has an IPC regression. They had a new naming scheme for it. I don't think Meteor Lake lived up to the hype at all. And I'm wondering what you think about that, and if you think Lunar Lake will.
I mean, if you look at Meteor Lake, and it was definitely planned as a mobile and desktop version in the beginning. We had more than one lake in this direction. I mean, we had LGA 1851. Yeah, we had LGA 1851 documentation many months or like over a year ago, which isn't happening if there are no plans. So for me, Meteor Lake was and still is a really, really interesting product from a design perspective. I mean, it's a really integrated solution. It's using 2.5D stacking with Forest, really, really great die-to-die interconnect technology, much more advanced than what AMD is using for their chiplets, lower power. It's actually a really cool product. I think Intel realized they still need a little bit time to get it where they want it to be. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think they stuck with the mobile version. And I mean, if you look at the IP in Meteor Lake, Red Roof Cove and Crestmont, they're basically the Intel 4 version of Raptor Lake or Raptor Cove and Crestmont. And I think the IPC regression that we can measure with Meteor Lake is most likely due to the fact that Meteor Lake is disaggregated. There are some latency penalties and some bandwidth penalties, even though a lot smaller than like with AMD's chiplet architecture, but it's not a monolithic chip anymore. There's some regressions there, and I think this 2 or 3% is due to the monolithic versus basically Intel's tile architecture. From what I've learned when talking to Intel engineers, and I mean, Redwood Cove should have basically on paper, if you would implement it in a monolithic chip, a similar or basically the same IPC. In maybe in some areas even 1 or 2% better, but Meteor Lake is just it's not a monolithic chip anymore, and you can measure that, and it's sad. Yeah.
But Zen 1 to Zen 2 gained IPC, and this is my concern.
Yeah.
Is we talk about, and it's true. I mean, look, Ponte Vecchio, Meteor Lake, Arrow Lake, they look, Lunar Lake, it looks really cool.
Yeah.
It does use more advanced, but another word for advanced might be more expensive technology. If AMD is able to hit the same performance with cheaper nodes and packaging, I mean, that makes me wonder if they're just putting the cart before the horse here. They're like, well, AMD's solution was chiplets, so let's do chiplets, not let's make sure we can do a good architecture and simpler chiplets first, and then try to. I feel like they just wanted to make a more complex chip before they knew if it would really be the right way to do it. You know what I mean?
Something I've been thinking about is also that maybe it's a kind of way to show, like, to advance their packaging capabilities, and have a pipe cleaner out, because if you want to be a leading edge foundry, and I mean they're not quite there yet. Right now they're in third place, but if actually Intel wants to get to a point where Intel Foundry is competitive, they not only need competitive nodes, they also need advanced packaging. Then that's the one thing that's limiting production right now. It's not TSMC's production capacity. It's CoWoS. It's CoWoS advanced packaging, and Meteor for us is the competition. So I think there is some argument to be made that Intel wants to show some progress there, and there's no better way to learn than actually put out volume with this technology. That's how you will figure out things that go wrong much quicker. So maybe that's also a part, but I honestly don't know the reason. I wish Meteor Lake would have been better. Funny thing is, you mentioned Zen 1 to Zen 2, and every time I think back, Zen 1 was monolithic, Zen 2 was chiplet architecture with on-package connection, like not a high-speed die-to-die interconnect. It was over-package, Infinity Fabric on-package. And Zen 2, as you said, had a much higher IPC and a lot more performance. And that feed, like that AMD managed to go from a monolithic chip to a chiplet architecture while gaining single thread and multi-thread performance and efficiency. That's such a huge engineering feat. Like most people don't really realize how impressive that was. And that's basically what jump-started AMD's domination in the CPU market. And Zen 2 was a blowout victory. I mean, you had a much better process node going from Global Foundries 14 or 12 nanometer to TSMC 7 nanometer, and Zen 2 was a better architecture. But combined, they just managed to have a product that's simpler and cheaper, but also better and faster. And that was AMD's
I
moment.
think they made it maybe almost look too easy to do. Like, because you say obviously you're going to gain by going to a better node. It's not always obvious. I mean, Intel hasn't going to better nodes with some things.
Yeah.
In fact, usually Intel doesn't. They have to have one generation that's not much better as they learn how to maximize and get good yields out of a node. And then after Ice Lake, you get Tiger Lake and it hits the right clock speeds. So one could almost argue that it's impressive they were able to do that by switching at the same time as switching foundries, something that they had trouble doing as well with RDNA 3 even. And it's just funny, like since Zen 2, I think it almost set up this impression amongst everybody that, oh wow, AMD did this with Zen 2. We should just expect them to do it every year because apparently it's easy. And it's like, no, it wasn't easy. And actually, from what I've heard too, Zen 2 was Zen 1. Like, that's what they were working on since Jim Keller joined. That's like the better part of a decade or half a decade of work to get to Zen 2. The reason Zen 1 didn't use those chiplets yet and came out first is they found that in like the half-finished version, it was really good. So we might as well put out the half-done version now to start making money before true Zen 1 is ready, which was Zen 2. And I think from that perspective that it really was like not one generation, but like that's what they were working on since Pile Driver. it's going to be a big deal, I believe, when they move to a new packaging tech with Zen 6. And I think thinking about how much trouble Intel's had with going to chiplets with Meteor Lake, how Nvidia still doesn't really want to do chiplets, makes you maybe understand why Zen 2, 3, and 4, and 5 use the same packaging setup, because it's probably really hard to get it working well the first time.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, never change a running system, and AMD knows it works. They've made all the qualification. They have experience with the layout, so it absolutely makes sense to continue down that road. And only once you really know you have something that's better, hopefully with Zen 6, we will see. But only once you really know you have something that's better, offers energy benefits, offers performance benefits, and doesn't really cost the world, is at a point where you can actually produce it in a cost-efficient manner. That's when you would switch. And we would not switch before. Why play games when you have money to make? And something you just touched on with Intel's nodes, that's something sometimes I have to remind myself that Intel 7, the nodes that Alder Lake and Raptor Lake Refresh are on, it's not an EUV node. Intel's first EUV node is Intel 4. That's Meteor Lake. That was also their first EUV experience. So it was a newer node. It's probably also a better node, but it was also the first node Intel internally with EUV. And at the same time, a new packaging and with followers. So there was a lot of technological things Intel did with Meteor Lake that were new. And they combined everything. And I mean, that's a gamble. And for what's it worth, how much technology Intel put into Meteor Lake, I feel like it could have gotten a lot worse than that if you consider the kind of technology changes in Meteor Lake. And I think a couple of weeks back or a couple of days back, there was a Intel presentation on their new Intel 3 process node, which is basically the slight improvement of Intel 4. And actually, it looks a lot better than Intel 4, and Intel 3 looks pretty competitive, even to TSMC's current offerings. And Intel is releasing their Xeon lineup, their Xeon 6, their P-Core versions and the U-Core versions will both use Intel 3. So maybe at some point we will have benchmarks and comparisons how well Intel 3 does. And Intel has to be on a way where they can control the nodes where they can control the nodes more if they want to offer their foundry business. Because if you want to have customers for your foundry business, you need to have nodes where you execute in a certain manner. You can't be like, well, maybe next year we'll have that, but we're not sure. And then maybe then switch everything around. I mean, TSMC has been so successful because they execute. And even if things are delayed, like with 3 nanometers, it's telegraphed way before. Everyone can adopt. They can choose. You want to use N3B or N3E, and TSMC is very straightforward and very trying to support all their customers. And Intel has to get there, and I think they're doing their best to actually get to this point. But it's still a road ahead of them for sure.
So I would say, though, at this point, that this is a make it or break it year, though, for Intel. That Lunar Lake, Arrow Lake, and Granite Rapids and Sierra Forest all have to perform very well, and Clearwater Forest, Rogue River Forest, I believe, comes after that, if I'm remembering correctly. Diamond Rapids, everything that comes out in 2025 and 6 also has to be perfect. Wouldn't you say? Because they really can't afford to have Lunar Lake come out and not be better than the competition in efficiency, or Arrow Lake come out and not match or beat Zen 5. Because when you look at their earnings, especially when you look at their mind share and how people talk about them, I think this is it, especially after Meteor Lake. Wouldn't you agree? I
feel you also notice how Pat Gelsinger talks about everything. I mean, he's really focused on the current, on the things that are releasing right now, and you can feel that there's a sense of urgency at Intel. And I wouldn't say they have to be perfect, but if they have to, I think
execute, you know what I mean.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah. I'm just trying. They have to execute. I mean, just for thought, if Lunar Lake which looks really interesting. I mean, it's a clear departure from Intel's previous SoC designs. I said in my video, like when you would have showed me the die shot of Lunar Lake without telling me it was an Intel CPU, I would have said, oh well, that's another ARM SoC. From how it looks like, with the 4-core P cores, 4-core E cores, but not on the same island, a large SLC cache, a large GPU with lots of cache, a large NPU, and all of this, and then the on-package memory, yeah. And all of that in a tiny chip. And there's clear inspiration from how ARM SoCs are designed. And that was very obvious. And I've talked to a few people, and like everyone's like, yeah, I mean, there's inspiration. It's not an ARM CPU, it's x86, but it looks really good in that way. And they're using TSMC's N3B process node. So if you have a clear new design, you have new IP, Lion Cove, and probably we're going to talk about it later. Lion Cove, Skymont, especially Skymont looks amazing. Even Battlemage, even XE2 looks vastly better than Alchemist. And if that fails against AMD and the new ARM competition, that's going to be a big problem. So I really hope it doesn't fail, because we need more competition. And from what I noticed, I mean, I was invited by Intel to Computex, to the event before, and I was able to talk to engineers directly in a one-on-one session. There was like a PR person sitting next to us, so the engineers wouldn't spill their guts.
I've been to at Hot Chips once. I was in a room like that. Yeah,
but you could notice you're talking to engineers, and from what I could gauge is like they were all pretty confident with Lunar Lake. Like that was my impression, that everyone was proud of what they designed, and they were confident, and So I have really, really high hopes for Lunar Lake, but it doesn't perform if it, for some reason, it lacks the energy efficiency, it lacks the performance. There are things going wrong. That's going to be a huge blow to Intel, and it's going to be a lot harder to recover from that, for sure.
Yeah. It's funny, though, you say that, because I went to the Hot Wings at Hot Chips event. I actually recorded it and uploaded it to YouTube. So that's still out there. Me and Gerard, the audio engineer, did our best to master the smartphone audio that I recorded from within a pocket, because I don't think they really expected people to record it, which surprised me, because it was a really interesting talk with Jim Keller and Raja Kadori. I have to say, though, they were like crazy enthusiastic and excited and confident back then. God, what would they have been talking about? Probably talking about God, I keep forgetting the name of it recently. Something with what was the first Sunny Cove 5-core product? You know what? I'm sure you know what I mean. That was their first beta test of Foveros technology.
Lakefield? No.
Lakefield. They were talking about Lakefield a lot back then.
Yeah.
And ARC was starting to be talked about. And those didn't pan out. And so from where I'm at this point, we'll see. I really, I've seen them be confident before, and it went nowhere. And I've seen them be confident before, and Tiger Lake and Alder Lake were great. So I don't know how to read into Intel confidence anymore after all of these recent releases. One thing that I will say that I think is good about Lunar Lake, just that shows their learning, is I thought the LPE cores on Meteor Lake were kind of like maybe the dumbest idea ever. Like, if you're going to put cores on an SoC die so that you don't have to use the other cores, why would they be so weak that they never want to be used? And with Lunar Lake, you can see that they completely scrapped that idea. Now it's 4 real cores. They're little cores, but they function much closer to decent cores. And so I could see that level of performance being, yes, we can leave the CPU tile turned off sometimes now.
Yeah.
So you can see them learning from their mistakes. And the original Lunar Lake design, I was told, did have 2 LPE cores. So they scrapped that pretty late in development, I think. So that's a good sign there. But I actually want to throw in this question here from QH Freddy, and I combined it with one from Swarm 2958. It says, they say, Lunar Lake looks great, but Meteor Lake did too until it flopped. Is there any reason to believe that Lunar Lake won't flop too? If a gun was up to your head, would you bet your life that Lunar Lake will firmly beat Strix and X Elite in efficiency. And keep in mind that some early comparisons seem to suggest that Lunar Lake models on the showroom floors of Computex are trading blows with Hotpoint in efficiency. And I do have a link to that too. So I think Lunar Lake looks cool. I actually really like the idea of Lunar Lake, this idea of maximizing 30 watts for not too many cores, decent graphics. But does your gut tell you it's going to be more efficient than Strix? And not just Strix, but like Kraken and the versions of Strix, like whatever the next Z1 Extreme is, you know what I mean? So that one meant to be used at 15 watts. Do you think it will actually win efficiency in a notable way?
I mean, that's a really good question. And my gut would say yes, but not because I've tested anything. I mean, I was able to get into, even during the pre-Computex event, there was like a showroom with all the different Lunar Lake, like they showed Lunar Lake doing rendering, Lunar Lake doing the video encoding, all the different stations with Lunar Lake laptops. I mean, I could open Windows Task Manager and look at how it performed, and like I didn't run benchmarks, but I could look at the Task Manager and what it was doing and how the cores were loading and all of that. But I'm not a reviewer. I don't review end products. Like I don't review laptops or GPUs or CPUs. Sometimes I feel like I would like to, but it's such a huge time drag. Like, it takes so much time. And then there's so much competition. I mean, you have Gamers Nexus, Hardware Unboxed, and like a myriad of others who do a really great job. So I don't feel like there's any space for me, and I don't really have the time. So I'm not a final product thing, but if I look at a chip itself and I look at Lunar Lake, which is on N3B, which is a superior process node to AMD's 4nm chips. Mm-hmm. It's a better process node. It has better values for not only transistor density, but also when it comes to efficiency. It's more efficient. And Lunar Lake is using on-package memory. This time I said it right the first time. On-package memory helps with power efficiency. Mm-hmm. And if you combine these two things, and if with on-package memory and the more advanced process node, Lunar Lake doesn't beat AMD in efficiency, and it doesn't have to be by a mile, but it's not competitive in efficiency or even ahead in some ways or another, I think that's going to be a little bit problematic because Intel is
I think it'll be more than a little. If they're using that expensive packaging and a more expensive node, and a lot more expensive node, by the way, against AMD, who's just using monolithic 200-something millimeter squared 4 nanometer again. I mean, I that's what I would tell investors, actually, too. Like, watch Lunar Lake. If it isn't more efficient than Strix, I would say run for the hills, because they have every advantage you could possibly have.
I mean, if it's barely keeping up, if it's competitive, but nothing more, then I mean, it shows that even with the better technology, the more expensive technology, it's just keeping up. So I would say, from my gut feeling, it should be better, but of course I have no way of knowing. Like, I didn't test it yet. And I mean, I look at the chip layout, but that can give you an idea if something's new, if there's a new design direction, if things changed. And they definitely did. There's a new design direction. A lot of things changed. Intel is trying a lot of new things, but I cannot tell yet if it works out. Like, I have no idea of knowing at this point, aside from talking to people, which I think sounded confident, but that's not a benchmark and that's not independent. And so we have to wait and see. But my gut feeling would say yes, but I wouldn't bet my life on it.
Okay, so you wouldn't bet your life on it, though,
no,
because the question was,
I don't bet my life.
Okay, so you're saying it should be, but if someone put a gun up to your head, you'd say,
bet $100.
You'd bet $100.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I would bet $100.
So that means you do think it will. Yeah. But you're not gonna like put out 20 videos saying Lunar Lake will be for sure be this good, because you aren't 100%.
No, I cannot be. I don't have the information.
Well, how do you think Arrow Lake's going to turn out here? Because, I mean, from what I'm hearing, this is still, I think it's going to be like a paper launch in Q4. And it seems, we got 8 big cores, 16 little cores, almost certainly no hyper-threading, and probably better IPC than Lunar Lake. But I'll probably bring it up in a second, where I could actually see it going in either direction. Meanwhile, we have Zen 5. It's like, 15, 25% better, depending on the task you're doing, one or the other. And I think, actually, I'll get into it in a second. I talked about this in a recent video of mine quite a bit, but I do think there's some things AMD probably is still holding close to the chest when it comes to XPD performance. But how do you see Arrow Lake versus Zen 5 panning out?
This generation, for the first time, like last generation, Intel's refresh, Zen 4 was the more interesting product from my point of view. This generation, I think it's really interesting for the first time in a long time, because we have both Zen 5 and Arrow Lake new chips, which have a lot of things going for them. And Arrow Lake, they're like two parts of me. Like one version of me looks at Skymont, and Skymont looks really impressive, like massively impressive. The IPC gains are really amazing, and as even in Lunar Lake. But if you look at if you take a Skymont core and and remove it from its 4-core low power island with 4 megabytes of L2 cache, and stick it onto the large L3 cache fabric of the P cores, and I mean a 8+16 Arrow Lake desktop CPU should have 36 megabyte of L3 cache.
I haven't looked at the actual specs of it for months.
I think the slice per core or per 4-core E-core tile is still 3 megabytes. So you have 8 big cores with 3 megabytes each. That's 24 megabytes. And then you have 4 additional 3 megabytes packs, 36 megabytes. I think it was the same with Raptor Lake. I mean, someone can look it up and confirm or not. But if they have access to 36 megabytes of L3 cache on the fabric, I mean, Lunar Lake does have the SLC cache, or the side memory cache, how Intel calls it. But it's certainly not as fast as a fabric memory, L3 cache how it would be on Arrow Lake. So Skymont and Arrow Lake will be faster than Skymont in Lunar Lake. I mean, Intel said that in their slides, and it's basically what they said in person too. So Skymont will be even more impressive in Arrow Lake, and I think that will deliver a lot of multi-thread performance, because you have 16 little cores, but little cores are suddenly really, really strong. And then Lion Cove, and that's kind of a little bit the wild card right now, because Intel claims 14% IPC increase, Lion Cove, but Lion Cove in Lunar Lake. And again, Lion Cove in Arrow Lake will also have access to a larger L3 cache. And we know from testing that can actually have a large impact, especially in tasks like gaming. Like gaming benefits a lot from a large L3 cache.
Do you think it'd be, because that's the thing, and the way I'm looking at Lion Cove and Skymont right now is, I was always told by people at Intel that the goal with Arrow Lake is to bring like a 25 to 35% consistent performance uplift in single and multi-threading core for core against Meteor Lake. When you look at the performance of Skymont, you go, well, they've clearly achieved it with that.
Yeah.
But the when I see 14% for Lion Cove, I go, it feels to me like Skymont hit its performance goals and Lion Cove maybe didn't. Although I think Arrow Lakes will be a bit better, implementation will be a bit better.
Yeah.
Do you think it'll be more than 5% better though? Like and again, no one's going to kill you. No gun up to your head for this question.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, because that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Like, do you think Intel is realistically in a few months going to come out and detail Arrow Lake, and they're going to go, actually, the IPC in an AMD-like moment, the IPC of Arrow Lake is 25% above Raptor Lake? Or do you think the limit's probably like 19? Because I would suggest I would be surprised, although it would be awesome if it was true. I'd be surprised if the IPC, if it's 14% in Lion Cove, if it's any more than 20 in Arrow Lake.
Yeah. It's really funny that you said 19, because I think 5% is a pretty good guess.
Well, great minds think alike. So
if you look at Lion Cove inside Lunar Lake with the small L3 cache and other limitations, and then you look at Lion Cove, how it could be in Arrow Lake, and instead of saying, well, we're 14% faster, we're 90% faster, that's something I could actually wrap my head around. And I mean, that's still a pretty strong showing. Like anything over 10% IPC increase. I mean, look at the generation, look at the years between 2011 and 2018. I mean, aside from Zen, if you look at Intel, we had 4%, 5%, and now we're back and we're getting 14 or 16% or 19% or 13% plus a lot more clock speeds, and people are like, oh my god, where are the huge IPC gains?
But that's because there's some people on Twitter that keep telling them it's going to be 40%, and I don't know. Maybe this is the last time that happens though, because I don't know how many times you have to hear that before you go, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, but I'm pretty hyped. The hype. I like the hype. I like to be hyped myself because I got into the whole semiconductor space, and I became a hardware nerd because of the hype. Because I like to believe in technology. It gets me excited, and I mean there have been some really great inventions, some really crazy new products, technologies that really upped the ante, that really showed everyone what can be done. I mean, look at Zen. I mean, yes, Zen kept AMD was behind by a lot, but Zen was a huge plot. And look at Sandy Bridge. Look at other. I mean, even Arrow Lake was a pretty good product. And look at
I think
X3D.
It was a great one.
X3D, amazing. You get a lot more performance while having a much more efficient CPU. So I love the hype. I'm a hyper myself internally. Like I'm hyped about a lot of things, and every time I do a video, and it really doesn't matter which company it is, I have to calm myself down. Like, okay, let's look at this with a clear mind. It's very likely not going to be.
That's usually what happens with a lot of my scripts as well. Is I'll start it and go, but if they did this and this and this and that, and then I have to go, okay, but is all of this going to come true at the same time? Yeah. Maybe I tone it down a little bit before I record this video.
But I think Arrow Lake is an interesting product, and at this point in time, I'm looking forward to it, and I think there might be good reasons to buy Arrow Lake over Zen 5 if Intel can offer a forward-looking statement like, okay, we're going to support our platform for longer, and Lion Cove has 15 to 20% more IPC on desktop than Raptor Cove, and you have these really powerful Skymont cores. And I think Arrow Lake's also going to be more efficient. And then you have the cool thing that some Arrow Lake SKUs, probably not the ones in desktop, there might be one in 20A. I think that's pretty much confirmed. That's also something.
No, it is confirmed. Yeah. I leaked that a year ago, and I believe Intel's literally said 20A publicly by now. And
that's actually the most exciting thing for me, Intel's new process nodes, 20A and 18A. And it's going to be really... You talked about it before, that investors have to look at how Lunar Lake performs. I think investors have to look at how the 20A version of Arrow Lake Mobile performs against the N3B version of Arrow Lake Mobile.
Well, I'll tell you right now that and granted, this was like maybe 6 months old info, but I was told that the 20A versions will be i5 and lower, and because they are less efficient than 3 nanometer though.
Okay. So, but you can still have a 3 nanometer i5 or deactivate cores or whatever. So you're at the same level. And I know it's not directly apples to apples.
Direct comparisons will be interesting, though. I'm sure you can.
That will be really interesting. Because 20A has a lot of new technology I think that's also really important for Intel's future, especially 18A, which is like the follow-up and the version that if you're a Foundry customer, that you can actually acquire, that you actually can build your stuff in at Intel Foundry. And that's a huge, like Lunar Lake, Arrow Lake, and 18A are like the building blocks of Intel's future. And if some of them have problems, then Intel's going to have problems too.
Yeah, I feel like Meteor Lake didn't do Intel Foundries any favors, because a lot of investors that I talked to were like, well, we'll see what happens here. Meteor Lake's going to use Intel 4, and this will prove they've caught up to TSMC. And then it didn't really have more efficiency than Hawkpoint. Actually, well, it was maybe slightly better than Phoenix, a little worse than Hawkpoint in efficiency. And you go, man, I really wish we could just know how Hawkpoint did on Intel 4, because I have a feeling it's that packaging holding back the efficiency, not the node itself.
Yeah. And I mean, I said it again. I said it before. Intel 4 is Intel's first EUV node. It's their first generation. And it takes time. And I mean, I wasn't really looking forward to Intel 4. I never thought it would be amazing. Intel 3 looks a lot better. And it's probably going to be a similar relationship between 20A and 18A, because the first one is almost always like a little bit of a pipe cleaner, internal only. It has less libraries available. So it's actually just for Intel. But 18A is going to be the one to look out for. And hopefully that will perform. Because what we need more than competition in the CPU and GPU market is competition in the foundry business.
Yeah, because I don't think Samsung's catching up to TSMC anytime
Yeah, it doesn't
soon.
look like that. And if it's only TSMC, and it's going to be only TSMC for the next decade, that's going to be the biggest bottleneck for the entire industry. So we need competition.
All Jessie wants is for Maurice to play with her more often. But unfortunately, he just does not give out playtime or kisses for as low of a rate as she does. And I think she's just going to have to deal with that. But do you know what you don't have to deal with? Paying too much for Microsoft software if you go to CDkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by CDkeyoffer.com. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest games, CDkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product this community deserves. Amongst endlessly elevating component costs, fair pricing on Microsoft keys is one thing that we at least should get, I think. And you know, the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with CDkeyoffer.com for a very long time. And that's because they're good to me, good to Dan, good to about a dozen family members of friends of mine that have used their services. And they've been really, really good, most importantly, to the Moore's Law is Dead community. So support this channel by using offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% off Microsoft software, or you can also use Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website like games. Using either of those codes really helps the channel a ton, and it helps save you money. So use those codes BrokenSilicon and Die Shrink at CDkeyoffer.com today.
One thing I want to point out, though, before we move on from Lunar Lake and Arrow Lake is there is one part of the Lion Cove P-Core performance slide that they showed that, again, I can make an argument for either direction. We're just going to have to wait for reviews. I can make a pretty easy argument that I think Arrow Lake's a little bit stronger than people are expecting, but I could also make the argument that they show a power performance curve that's unlabeled, and they show near the bottom you have 18% more performance at same power than Meteor Lake with Lion Cove, but at the top it's 10%. Is there any concern here? Because that's why the Meteor Lake version of the desktop version of Meteor Lake was canceled. It's very clear that Meteor Lake really isn't very competitive actually at 15 watts, but at 35 to 65 watts, that's its efficiency band. And then once you get to 95, it's barely better than Raptor Lake. Once you get to 125, actually Raptor Lake's more efficient. Do you have any concern, though, that we might have a situation here? I mean, I'm just looking at Intel's own slide that shows 10%, and I would assume it's below 100 watts, that once you get up to like 150 watts, actually Lion Cove is probably much stronger than Raptor Lake, but it's not the efficiency gain that we were hoping for. Or I wonder what you think about that. And I've heard that they're not going to clock it to as high of a TDP as before, but that's where I become concerned when I look at the slide and it's like, okay, they're probably going to limit it to 180 to 225 watts, not 400 this time. But if they're saying it's 10% at the top there, is this a situation where mobile Arrow Lake's 20% more efficient than Raptor Lake, but desktop is actually only 10%? Or I'm wondering if that's an outcome you could see happening, or if we should be worried about that, because it's happened before.
In that slide, does it say if it's Lion Cove on Lunar Lake, or is it just Lion Cove in general? Or
on this slide, it says Lion Cove in Lunar Lake.
And I mean, I'm guessing here, but one of the things that Intel talked about is that like Lion Cove is more of a like generation of cores, and there's different cores in there. It's like an overarching term. And I mean, Lion Cove in Lunar Lake has different properties than Lion Cove in Arrow Lake and then Lion Cove in Xeon. And the biggest difference we pretty much know that Lion Cove in Xeon will have hyperthreading activated. And we know that Lion Cove in Lunar Lake does not have hyperthreading.
What makes you sure you know that in Xeon?
Let's say I've talked to some people and Intel didn't say directly, yes, of course, because they didn't talk about Xeon, about the next generation Xeon. They talked about Xeon 6, which is releasing right now, but it doesn't have Lion Cove. But a lot of people told me, well, when I told them, does it really make sense to remove hyperthreading from a server product? And he told me, you're right, it does not make sense. It would not make sense to remove hyperthreading from a server product. And they told us directly, and that the Lion Cove can be configured with hyperthreading or without hyperthreading, and it can be configured with AVX512 and without. And the implementation in Lunar Lake actually physically removes hyperthreading. It's not just disabled; it's not there physically. That it doesn't have the transistors. And if you specifically say that the Lion Cove version in Lunar Lake has hyperthreading removed physically, but it certainly does exist for the Lion Cove family of cores, I'm 99% confident that Lion Cove in the next generation Xeon, in Xeon 7, will have hyperthreading.
So Diamond Rapids?
Yeah, like I'm right now, I don't know the code name, but probably Diamond Rapids, yeah. And I'm on the fence with Arrow Lake. I would say it's unlikely that Arrow Lake has hyperthreading. If anything, maybe Arrow Lake Mobile won't, and Arrow Lake Desktop will, but maybe that's too many different versions. But
yeah, I'd have to look at what they're doing with tiles to decide if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you what I heard, and this was like one of those shockers middle of last year to my memory, is out of nowhere it became pretty clear that Arrow Lake was being tested without hyperthreading. And it was actually Arrow Lake that was being tested without it. And when I talked to people at Intel, they said, yeah, we had to disable it. And what I was told is they're trying, well, because it changes over time, right? First month, middle of last year, they were saying we're trying to get it working again. And then by the end of last year, I was told there's like no way it's in, not no way, but like there's almost no way it's in Arrow Lake and Lunar Lake, but that they're going to try to get it into server. So I would actually believe that maybe Diamond Rapids has it. I would actually not dispute that. I would be very, very surprised if Arrow Lake had it, though, not just because of like when it makes sense, but because something went wrong. And I think they need that year to get it working in Diamond Rapids. And I don't think they're going to be doing a lot of weird stuff with cores after Diamond Rapids. So I guess I won't say what I think or won't think they'll do with threads, because that might fundamentally change even how they work.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. I think we know Lunar Lake does not have hyperthreading, and we know it's not physically there. So it's not just deactivated; it just doesn't have it. And we pretty much know that Xeon will have it. And there's a lot more arguments to be made that Arrow Lake won't have hyperthreading. I'm like not 99%, but I'm like 90% sure that Arrow Lake won't have hyperthreading. There's I'm a little bit on the fence. I don't know. But I think they cover the multi-thread part just with the much better, much stronger Skymont. If you have like a 40 and 70% IPC uplift on Skymont.
Are you sure it's 40 or 70%? Because it looks like it's much closer to the bottom there. Because in one of their slides, they compare it to Meteor Lake LPE cores, and they're using 4 Lunar Lake cores versus 2 like 1 gigahertz Meteor Lake cores.
Yeah, but that's for multi-thread. The multi-thread comparison, that's also something I directly addressed when I looked at the slides. Like while they were flowing, I'm like, you're comparing 4 Skymont cores to 2 cores in multi-thread, and I think there it says 4x uplift or something like this on the slide. Like,
so.
Yeah, of course. So, of course, that's irrelevant. But for the single thread, Skymont is definitely in that range. And the reason they made the comparison for the low power E cores is that if you take the if you take the Crestmont cores on Meteor Lake, for example, if you would have taken these for comparison, they are connected to the fabric of the P cores, and they have access to the L3 cache. So since the low power E cores or the E cores on Lunar Lake, they're their own little island. They're not connected to the performance cores. They don't have access to the L3 cache. They have this system level cache, the 8 megabyte L2 system level cache, but they're also not directly adjacent to it. So there's also some latency some latency between these two areas of the chip. So it's actually just a 4-core cluster with 4 megabytes of L2 cache. That's Skymont on Lunar Lake. It's its own island. And on Meteor Lake, if you would have taken the 4-core cluster, that's a cluster that's attached to the fabric, to the L3 cache. And I feel like, especially in gaming, that would have been a bad comparison, because if you have a lot of L3 cache, fast L3 cache, you have a huge advantage in gaming. And if you're Intel, you don't want to make that comparison.
Well, of course you don't. but that's where I would go. I don't think we can read into the personally. I don't think we can read into the multi-threading slide. I mean, it's running at 1 gigahertz. It's double the cores. You could say it's not a fair comparison, but then I could say, well, it's a more fair. If they were sure it was going to do well, though, wouldn't you want to show that anyways, to say, look, and this one's not even connected? And I also want to bring up, the IPC of Skymont, because Gracemont, they said, had higher IPC than Skylake, right? Well, Skylake to Ice Lake is 18%, and then Ice Lake to Golden/Raptor Cove is like another 20. Yeah, it's 40%. It's like a 40% uplift. Isn't that what we should have expected? That's kind of what I'm getting. They've been using Gracemont since 2021.
You mean because the E-cores were basically lacking? They were staying on the same IPC for a longer time, and because now they're catching up.
Yeah, I think Intel's very quick to point out that Skymont is as strong as Raptor Lake without saying Gracemont wasn't that far behind. I mean, Gracemont is better than Skylake. That places it within 40% of Raptor Lake anyways. Yeah. If it wasn't as good as Raptor Lake, I'd say that's a failure. They haven't had a new E-core since 2021. So, you're launching something like 4 years later. Shouldn't it be 2 generations better? And I think, I wonder if you would say anything to that. Like, I think there's a misconception that Raptor Lake isn't as much stronger than Gracemont as people think it is in IPC. The reason Raptor Lake performs wildly faster than Gracemont is that it is clocked a lot faster, and it is hyperthreading. Arrow Lake will not have hyperthreading. So, again, that's where I come from my perspective of, unless we are surprised and Lion Cove turns out to be over 20% higher IPC, I go, isn't Skymont just what we should have expected, and isn't Lion Cove just underperforming? It should be 40% faster, shouldn't it? I mean,
I wouldn't call it what I would expect, but your argument is pretty valid that Intel didn't progress their E-core IP for a longer time, and it was overdue for a bigger upgrade. So that certainly plays on that. So I definitely see your point, and I think another similar IPC upgrade in IPC for the E-cores would have been disappointing. So yes, we were expecting there was something overdue for sure. So if
it was just 20%, that wouldn't be enough. That's been too long.
And then we're at a point where if the E-cores gain 20% and the P-cores gain another 14%, the difference, like the distance between them, stays the same. And then you have the IPC and clock speed difference, which at one point, you have to think about Intel's strategy. And it's still a strategy. Sometimes I can fully see it. Like, it does make sense if you have like these huge cores and like they're physically big and they're power hungry, but they have a lot of IPC and clock really high. And then like, okay, but we cannot put a lot of them on the chip. So we design these cores, which are physically small, more efficient. So I completely get that. But other times I think about it and I'm like, it's 2 different cores. It's 2 different IPs. It's like 2 different types of cores in a chip. And I mean, we can see from AMD that you can do it differently. And I personally like AMD's approach with Zen 4, Zen 4C, Zen 5, Zen 4C a lot more. It's a lot more streamlined. But then at the same time, if you look at ARM, all the other ARM chips, there's usually 2 or sometimes even 3 different core types. So
Yeah, but is that they haven't really proven they're better? You know, like you can do all of these different core types, and at the same time, Apple's performance in CPU is kind of stagnating per core for a while. I don't think. I think you just got to engage in the idea when you make an argument, like whether it's for this type of core design or that type of core design. And the argument needs to be why this will work better. Not they did it, so it must be right.
Yeah.
You know, because up until now, it seems to be working out pretty well at AMD. And I'll say, let me throw in this reader mail here. Lucas Slicer writes in and says, do you see AMD going into hybrid design like Intel? I'd argue they kind of have, or are they going to stick with more conventional layouts where they basically have the same core implementations that vary density? And let me jump in here and say it's something I decided to do a Strix volume leak last week instead of talking about some Zen 7 stuff because it's so far out. But that was a real discussion that's going on at AMD right now. Should we have 2, 3, or I've heard 4 or 5 different core types, or shouldn't we? And it kind of sounds like to me, this would be part of the video, they're leaning towards sticking with what they're doing, just more versions of the same core. But I'm wondering if you think it would make sense for them to change that, or if they should just keep doing things the way they are.
I feel like at this point, we haven't seen anything like this from AMD because AMD's main cores were already pretty balanced. I mean, look at Zen 3, Zen 4. The cores, if you look at performance per area, performance per watt, they're all in a very good range, especially compared to competition. They're not too large. They're not too power hungry. So I feel like AMD wasn't really in a position where they were forced to think about how do we counter one of the downsides of our main core architecture, because there wasn't really one major downside. Like if you look at Intel, and the reason we've seen these architectures on ARM is actually pretty different because most ARM chips originate from mobile devices. Like the whole ARM evolution, like when you go back to the early 2000s, and ARM really didn't play wasn't really a factor in the industry. And then came the smartphone era, and every smartphone suddenly had a SoC, and it was mostly ARM. A lot of R&D going in, a lot of money going in. And the reason ARM switched to these hybrid architectures was because you have really small mobile devices, smartphones with really small batteries, and the efficiency cores are really primarily efficiency only. There's usually a huge performance delta between performance and efficiency cores. At least for many years, there was a huge difference, like 80% or something like this. A huge IPC and then clock speed difference, much bigger than what we see with Intel. So on ARM, efficiency cores were really really tiny, really efficient cores. So you don't drain the battery on your $50 or $100 smartphone you sell in certain parts of the world. And Intel's approach, while of course it's in a similar direction, it's more to counter the downsides of the performance cores of the
how
big
much
cores.
Die space their big cores take
and
up.
AMD wasn't really and still isn't, in my opinion. We have to see how big Zen 5 is, but if we look at the dies, I mean, there's some die shots out there, not of the chips yet, but we can see how big the CCDs are. It doesn't really seem like Zen 5 is much larger.
It seems like, if anything, it's smaller, and they found a way to make the cache smaller, which was a surprise to me. I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah. So from my point of view right now, we have to measure, but it doesn't really look that much different than before. And I don't feel like AMD has the pressure. And with Zen 4 and Zen 5C, they already have a version that's optimized for this cloud hyperscaling. So I don't think that AMD has to.
We don't have proof yet that they really need to, right?
Yeah. From my point of view, they don't really need to. I'm pretty sure there are plenty of people thinking about it, just because the idea is out there and it's been done by a lot of different companies. And there's smart people at other companies too. So you'd be stupid to not think about it.
Also, I'm wondering, how useful do you think having a ton of little cores, especially in desktop, is going to, or laptop, certainly even double so, is going to be moving forward, though? Because we're looking at like the integration of NPUs and other accelerators. And there's a that wonders, especially because I've kind of moved away from doing long-term Intel roadmap leaks, but the last one I remember doing, or the last few, I believe it was like Arrow Lake 8+16, refresh 8+32. And then there was going to be something I was looking at that was like Beast Lake, where maybe they even go for 4 big cores and just dozens of little cores. I no idea if that's still the plan as of now, though, just so everyone knows. And how much do we really need that, though? Because I look at all of these benchmarks like Cinebench multi-threading, and I'm like, nobody uses, like, we're going to use most of the time a GPU to do that, an NPU to do this other thing in the future, maybe an accelerator to do something else. I think adding more than 16 cores will be a thing on consumer products within 10 years. But I do wonder how useful it really is to just have a ton of little cores, whereas you just have at least 16 decent cores and then specialized task cores or modules. Is this something we're really going to want in 10 years? Is 64 little cores? I don't know if that will happen. For example, and 4 big cores, or would we rather just have like 24 big cores? They all work the same speed, or relatively speaking. There's no bugs to worry about. And then you take that die space that you would have used for little cores and just add other things you can do with a specialized FPGA or something.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly see a direction where more and more tasks are done by specialized hardware. Like, just as you pointed out, we have more accelerators in more areas, and the CPU itself, especially if you look at mobile devices where power efficiency is the primary focus, it always makes sense to have an accelerator do something, because it will be more efficient than if you have a CPU doing it. And so it's a really interesting question. And to one point, I can see a future where we have more accelerators and a smaller CPU in the future, where everything is divided. Like, as you said, we have an NPU that does a lot of all the AI, machine learning, and it's more than that. It's also image processing tasks, like the background blur or all of that things. All of these things are done by an NPU. And then, of course, you have the GPU, which, when it comes to what the GPU does best, is heaps more efficient than a CPU. And one downside of all these different cores is the scheduling. And that's something that when Intel talked about hyperthreading in Lunar Lake, Intel also talked about the scheduling. And the point is that the point they made, and something that I haven't really considered so far, is that Intel doesn't only have 2 kind of cores in their current, but it's 3 kind of threads. And it really makes sense, because Intel always called the management unit that handles these threads, they called it thread director and not core director. It's not a core director, it's a thread director. And they've been calling that a thread director since Alder Lake, if I remember correctly. And you have the performance, the P-cores threads that run on the cores themselves. Then you have the P-cores hyperthreading threads that run on the hyperthreading part of the core. And then you have the E-core. So you have 3 different kind of threads. And if you add another core to that, or another version, there's so many different threads to consider, and the operating system has to choose, okay, which one is the best one? Do I choose the efficiency core? Do I choose the performance core? Do I choose a thread that's not a real one, but a hyperthreading thread? And if you add more to that, it's going to be more complicated. And if there's one thing I wouldn't put my faith into, it's the Windows scheduler. Like, I don't think there's been a point in time where it was like, okay, it's really good now. And all the companies had their problems with the scheduler. I mean, Intel worked pretty well from the beginning, but even there, I mean, we see performance in E-cores and P-cores. We have performance differences in some games where you turn off the one kind of core and suddenly you have a much better performance than if you don't turn them off. And remember all the AMD troubles in the beginning with the scheduler, with Zen and the CCX and CCDs, where like it was switching the threads
Zen 2
all the
is
time.
when they really got it working well.
Yeah, but it's like, it always needs work, and I wouldn't put I think that's something you have to consider. And your question with the many cores, how many cores do we actually need? If I'm looking at rendering, and if I'm rendering my my videos, it's much faster on a CPU, on a GPU. It's much faster. There's no question. And it's not a little bit faster. It's so much faster on a GPU. It doesn't make sense to render it on a CPU. So,
or even if you're using like Intel QuickSync and using the little integrated GPU is still faster too.
I have a 2020 MacBook Pro, the last Intel version. I bought it used just before I went to Computex because I had a really old laptop that wasn't usable to edit videos. So I bought a used MacBook, and it was really cheap, a really good deal. And it has a quad-core Intel i5. It still runs the newest Mac OS, but it's not a Apple chip in there. And I was like, okay, let's see if it can actually work. And I mean, it's not the fastest, but I shoot my videos in 1080p, so it's not a high-res video, but it handles it perfectly. And yes, it does take 15, 16 minutes to render a video, which on my desktop takes 7 or 6. But it works flawlessly. And honestly, the when I'm scrolling through the timeline, it feels better than on my desktop because somehow DaVinci Resolve optimized for Apple and the Intel QuickSync more than for my Radeon GPU, and it actually feels more snappier when I'm scrubbing through the timeline. And it's an old laptop, and that's because of this QuickSync feature. So yeah. So I don't know. I think, especially after you say that, for when I think of AMD's perspective, I think they're going to say what we're doing seems to be working. And every time they release a new Zen grounds up architecture like Zen 5, or I guess Zen 4 wasn't grounds up, but it was a new architecture, you see them somehow manage to make their SMT even more effective. I mean, I remember back with like, I want to say Sandy Bridge and Ivy Bridge, people would say that hyper-thread. Yeah, they would. Well, and if it worked well, it'd be 20% more. I think Haswell got it to 25 to 30% more. By the time we got to Zen 4, they're like 30, 40% more. Zen 5 is pushing it right up to the limits of what you could theoretically achieve with it. And they're like, well, if we can make hyperthreading work this well and every core can have it, we can have 32 threads against their 24 threads. Why don't we just keep working on this? Because the amount of money, and I think it might just make even more sense on the AMD side because Intel is still very close with Microsoft and they get to work with them so closely on working on Windows and scheduling. I think if you're AMD, you're probably like, are we so sure they're going to give us the attention we would need to make our little cores work well? So yeah, I don't see them doing that anytime soon. This piece of content is brought to you by the Coswheel CT20 e-bike. Over the past few weeks, I've been able to test the CT20 fairly extensively, and that's both because I wanted to, but because I kind of had to. Completely by coincidence, my car has been in the repair shop for the past few weeks, and while I can, of course, borrow my girlfriend's car, sometimes I actually can't. She needs to use it for something where I am not going to or at, and I just needed this to go somewhere. And I have to say, the CT20, if you're someone who wants to use this to go to the corner store or the grocery store, even places miles away, I think this is a decent option for those sorts of people that live in a city or especially like a dense, smaller town. Like, you know, you don't need to go over 28 miles per hour, but you also don't want to get all sweaty or go somewhere, try to get something and not be able to bring it home. This bike has an insane range. It goes up to 87 miles in a single charge. And then if it were to run out of battery, you can still keep pedaling. So this is something that has like real vehicle-like range and you never have to fill up with gas, which is really cool. However, I do have to caution, it is not a motorcycle. And even if I like to pretend it was one, it isn't. And I used to ride motorcycles in Detroit, Michigan when I lived there. So I know the difference between a fancy bike and an actual motor vehicle. And that's the distinguishing thing I'd say about this. It is not a budget motorcycle. What it is like a god tier bike that has the utility of a motorcycle if you don't need to go as fast. It can actually carry a lot of stuff. Like it has a basket built in for groceries. It can carry multiple people on the seat. It doesn't just have a bicycle seat. Then this is the thing for you. Although also this is something that you should only get if you're comfortable working on it with a decent amount of skill yourself. It comes mostly assembled. Then you have to finish the assembling. The directions online are there,
but they're limited. And I actually had to go through and tighten and check some screws and stuff to just make sure everything was perfectly ready to go. It's not something I think anyone who's owned a motorcycle before would really care about, nor somebody who works on their own bicycles. But it is something you'll probably have to do. And yeah, I guess anyways, though, that gets me to my final conclusion. This bike, the CT20, it is for somebody who knows how to work on a bike or something, but then also wants a fancy bike with God tier electric range, the sort of range that from what I can tell online would usually cost thousands of dollars more, or it would come in a bike that is much smaller, lighter, and doesn't have the utility to carry multiple people and groceries home on it like it's a motorcycle. It's not a motorcycle, but it does have the utility of a motorcycle for the people that want that in an e-bike that doesn't cost like $4,000. So yeah, I do recommend it for people like that. And if you are interested in this product, please go to the link in the description and purchase it. You will be directly supporting me if you do. Support this channel by checking out the Coswheel CT20 today. All right, I do want to pivot here a bit and make sure we talk about the Qualcomm Snapdragon X Elite.
Yeah.
Chris Rich writes in and he says, from a pure hardware design perspective, how do you rate the X Elite? What kind of market share would Qualcomm need to achieve a year from now to be considered a success from your perspective? Do you think it has any chance of achieving that too? And I'll jump in and say, I think from a design perspective, the X Elite is not bad. Its die size is a little smaller than Phoenix. It has similar CPU performance if optimized well. It has a graphics performance that's worse than Phoenix, I guess, but it does have a much better AI engine. And in ideal scenarios, it is more efficient. So from the perspective of it's Phoenix, same node, slightly, very slightly, but still slightly smaller die size, that does seem like an achievement to me. However, I will say this is not a $1,500 Strix Halo competitor or some kind of like premium APU in my perspective. But I wonder what you think.
Can you read the question again? He asked from a design or from a hardware perspective. So I like one of my latest videos, like I think 2 videos ago, I made a video about Snapdragon. And I mean, right now we have the basic hardware specs. There's nothing really that in-depth on the X Elite even now, and we don't have a die shot yet. So I'm really looking forward to getting these pictures. And I'm pretty sure it will look very similar to Apple's M1 or M2 generation chips from the layout. I mean, of course, it has more cores and it only has P cores and not E cores. But the one thing that got me really interested about Snapdragon, and that's basically also what this video is about, because there wasn't really anything I could talk about hardware-wise aside from like the specs that Qualcomm gave us, is the story, like the history of the chip, especially of the CPU cores. And I mean, there's still a huge lawsuit going on between ARM and Qualcomm at the moment. And ARM wants Qualcomm to destroy all chips based on this CPU design. And they're still fighting for that. And the reason is that, so the story goes like this. They're back at Apple, back in 2019, few Apple employees started their own company, Nuvia. And it's not just any Apple employees. It was like the chief SoC architects and some of the major people at Apple who've been with Apple since like the A4, A5X, basically since Apple started to have their own design teams when they bought Palo Alto Semiconductors and then started making their own ARM chips, or at least their own cores in the beginning. And these people who basically put Apple on the map and who made Apple into, to be honest, the leading ARM CPU architects in the world. I mean, the M series was, at this point, Apple was at the pinnacle. There was no one better. Right now, there's more competition, but Apple is still.
There were a couple of years there where everyone was just blown away. Yeah,
it was just leading everyone ahead of the competition in performance and efficiency and everything. And some of the lead architects and key people of Apple, they left Apple and they founded their own company, Nuvia. But Nuvia was a little bit different. They wanted to make ARM server CPUs. So they were fed up at Apple only doing mobile chips.
And I heard Apple was working on those, but we have yet to see them. So I wonder if they left after seeing it go nowhere.
Yeah, like what I heard is that they said, well, we want to do it now. And Apple said, no, we're not a server company. And then they left and they started Nuvia, and they called their core Phoenix, interestingly. Like the CPU core was called Phoenix. And they left Apple when the specs of the M1 was already finished. So they knew how the M1 was going to perform, and they were the key people behind these architectures. And then just 2 years after founding Nuvia, and before any actual product had a tape out, Qualcomm acquired Nuvia for like $1.4 billion. And then ARM said, well, Nuvia has a ARM license, but they had a very different one because the core was designed for a server market, like for a server CPU, with a very different volume than if you would ship something like a mobile chip, like the X Elite. Like there will be a lot more X Elite chips shipped than if you would have taped out a server CPU. And basically, ARM is saying it's a different license, and Qualcomm bought Nuvia, but they want Nuvia to basically renegotiate a new licensing terms for the architecture that was developed by Nuvia, and that's the same CPU architecture that made it into the X Elite, or pretty much the same one. And because Nuvia only designed one core type, a performance core, a server core, the X Elite only has performance cores. That's the reason. And it's super interesting because, I mean, there's lawsuits going on about this. Even Apple sued Nuvia at some point. But if you go back, the people who designed the M1 also designed the CPU cores in the X Elite. So I'm pretty sure it's a world-class CPU architecture. There's no question about it. These people know what they're doing. And the only question I have is, after Qualcomm acquired Nuvia, how much did they bought the whole team, the whole design? Because you cannot just take a server CPU and just put it into a mobile, low-power mobile chip one. You have to change it a little bit. So I hope Qualcomm didn't, I don't want to say the word F it up too much. And
oh, that's interesting. I might have to ask you this question then, because something that keeps popping up in Broken Silicons right now is people asking, when Apple put out the first M1, it blew people away. The M2 was considered good. 3, though, not as much of an uplift. And people are wondering, will the next generation of X Elite likely be a massive boost in your opinion? And because I could see it going two ways from what you just said. Could they have wringed everything they can out of some world-class design they already had, and then this is it? Or do you think because they had to do something to make it work in mobile when it was meant for server, that the second generation might actually be a large uplift that fixes all of these things?
Yeah, so basically, I think because first you had to take the performance core design from the server CPU, and you had to rearrange it in a way that it fits a low-power laptop, and I mean even mobile CPU core. I think there's a lot of things that they learned during this transition, which they will be able to implement in a possible second generation. I feel like every time you're doing something, you learn a lot of things and you notice, okay, we could have done this differently, but there's no time right now. We could have changed this, we could have changed that. And especially once you have a volume production of a new CPU, that's the time where you get the most amount of information, where you get the most amount of data out of your chips, and where you finally know actually what went wrong, what went right, and where you should put more focus. And the closer to launch you get, the more information you get, and then after launch you have the most amount of information. So I'm sure, and I'm pretty sure Qualcomm certainly is already working on a second generation. And I think there's a really good chance that the second generation will see a pretty decent increase over the first one.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, and I think some people thought I was negative about the X Elite, but look, in CPU it ties Hawk Point. It is more efficient unless you're doing really heavy workloads, and I guess it's the same as Hawk Point. Obviously, it's AI performance, which you might argue isn't that useful yet, but it is, of course, better than the competition there. You know, but tying something that launched 3 months ago or 4 months ago, that's not really that impressive to me. But I definitely don't think it's like Alchemist, where it's like, I'm worried this is going to pan out ever. I think what we can see with their design is that on paper, it delivers when optimized in a way that I don't think Intel Alchemist did. And especially based on what you just said, as long as they continue to work on the software, emulation support, and more native ARM apps, and make a good second generation, I think this could be a huge, much more successful the second time around. And while I personally can't really recommend this as a product you'd buy now, I actually think it is likely the second gen will be something that will be worth watching in a way that I don't think a lot of new competitors and markets are worth watching. Like, I think the future could be bright for this lane of ARM CPUs.
And I feel like Apple, and not Apple, I feel like Microsoft really wants to make it work this time. I think it's the third try. I think they tried it once, Windows with ARM on ARM CPUs. The first one was in 2012. And then there was one in 2018, like a couple of years back. Yeah,
no one paid any attention to them because they weren't very good.
Windows RT and all of this stuff. And I feel like they really want to make it work this time. And something that to consider, I mean, adding to what you just said, the second generation will surely be better. But even right now, if you're interested in a Snapdragon X Elite, like a Windows on ARM device with the Snapdragon X Elite or the X Plus, whatever version you want to buy, just waiting a few months for the software to get better, I think is a good idea, because right now the software is pushed to a huge install base because a lot of people are buying these new laptops. There's a lot.
I'm not hearing that many people are actually, but more than a beta test.
Yeah, a lot more than beta test for sure. Like it doesn't really matter if it's gaining a large market share. Like, I mean, we've heard some 50% claims from ARM in the next couple of years.
That's what their goal is. We'll see about that.
Yeah. But even if it's not selling crazy amounts, it's selling a lot more than the install base will be a lot higher than ever before with Windows on ARM. And just that telemetry, like, which Windows is getting back from all of these laptops, and I'm pretty sure they have everything enabled by default, so they're sending everything back. That will give them so much valuable information. I'm sure it just will take a few months for a lot of software to improve.
Eric Sislix writes in and asks, what are Snapdragon and ARM chips really supposed to do that x86 can't? More competition is always better, I suppose, but I'm surprised there was any expectation at all for these Snapdragon laptops to sell. I don't think most consumers know about them, nor care that much about what the sticker is. Well, I'll say this. I don't think there really is one. I mean, what we've seen in early reviews is that there really doesn't seem to be a consistent efficiency advantage with ARM versus x86 so far. But I don't know that that's the point. I think the point is Microsoft just wants to be able to have more chips in their laptops and not be beholden to more companies. And they're laying the groundwork for, I mean, you got to know NVIDIA's watching this closely, right? And they're seeing how this pans out. I mean, if Microsoft and Qualcomm lay the groundwork for good ARM support on Windows in a few years, it's more than Qualcomm. There could be all types of competitors, Samsung, Nvidia, showing up to make chips. And that's just better in general. And I think a lot of people miss that, like, the point of ARM is the freedom, not really that it's some silver bullet in efficiency.
Yeah. I mean, it's not freedom from a company. I mean, ARM is still controlling the ISA and other users.
But it's a lot more than before.
But it's more than before. It's more than just Intel and AMD. And I mean, you talked about Nvidia. I'm pretty sure, I mean, there's a lot of rumors, so it does make a lot of sense that Nvidia is also working on their own CPU. I mean, they already have their CPU. They have Grace. They're working on their next gen ARM CPU, which is going to be Vera, like from Vera Rubin. There's this next gen CPU is going to be called Vera. And Qualcomm, we know, have their DX Elite. MediaTek is also working on a new chip for sure. There were some rumors that they will do it together with NVIDIA, but as far as I know, it's two different projects. NVIDIA isn't working with MediaTek on their version. And if this pans out, if Windows on ARM is gaining more market share, and if you look at the marketing, Microsoft is really pushing it, and Qualcomm is also really pushing it. They have a lot of design wins. I'm pretty sure they're selling their chips for very competitive prices. Like, it's very hard to convince a lot of OEMs to launch a first-gen product, especially with a higher-end lineup, in a high-end lineup of yours. I mean, there's some really high-end laptops coming out with the X Elite. And one way to do that is with financial incentive. Okay, how much you're paying for a Intel chip, how much you're paying for a AMD chip, we're charging 30-40% less or whatever. I mean, for Qualcomm, it would even make sense, like in a console generation, to take a loss on the first-gen CPUs just to get a high install base and get your products into the market. And then once you have the install base, then actually start making money with it. I don't know if it's like that. Maybe not, but that's something. If I'm Qualcomm, I would go that route and charge very little, maybe even sell my products as a loss.
Yeah, I mean, I just put out an analysis of, well, actually, it was a leak that actually AMD is going to go really hard with volume in a way and supply they never have before with a mobile launch, from what I'm hearing. Like what you should see by the end of July in supply for Strix will probably be more than what we saw with Hawkpoint in the first month or two. So they're going for it. What I saw analyzing at least the pricing of early, Strix and Qualcomm laptops is it doesn't seem like there's a price premium here for Strix that's more than a little bit. So I don't think that AMD is charging much more because, the chart that I put on screen showed any time an AMD product costs more. Like the extreme example on the top end was a 2100 Surface product with an X Elite, a $2,300, I believe it was $2,300 Asus product with 12-core Strix.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it costs $200 more, but it also has a 4070 and more RAM, which means more RAM, and it had double the storage, double the refresh rate on the display. So I'm not seeing evidence it costs that much more. I think that there's a big part of this where I've heard that Microsoft has subsidized the X Elite heavily in its R&D, and Microsoft is telling everyone this thing better succeed. So that, and I think OEMs feel that way as well, so they can open the door for more ARM competition. At the same time, though, I also think that they're betting on the AI craze, and this is a chance to have the first AI laptops. And I don't think any OEM, right? Wouldn't you agree? Could you see whether it's hype or not? I don't think Dell or HP is going to want to be the ones to say, we don't have an AI laptop in June. We're going to wait until Strix or Lunar Lake. No, I think they're all going to make sure that one right.
Yeah, fully agree. I think if you look at the AI craze, it's we talked about it before. It's everywhere, and I think a lot more people use ChatGPT and all these new image generation features. I've talked to a lot of people. I mean, I use it myself. I've used ChatGPT basically from the beginning. Literally the first week, I've bought a premium version, and it's a hype, but I feel like there's also a lot of people who actually use these basic functions, like just ask a question to ChatGPT, just generate an image, just use your NPU in an AI feature for something, because there are lots of useful tasks you can do with. I mean, it doesn't matter if you call it AI or machine learning. So if you're an OEM, just like you said, you want to be right at the start. You want to be right at the beginning. You want to be right there and have your products on the market. And especially, I remember even at Computex, there was confusion if AMD and Intel, if Strix Point and if Lunar Lake would even support the whole Copilot Plus experience. Or
if Intel
and AMD, if Microsoft would even support all the features on x86, on Intel and AMD. there was some confusion if some of the features would be reserved
when it was
the
first
ARM
announced.
version.
Yeah, I remember that. I never thought that would happen. That'd be insane.
Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons to get your products out really quickly, and X Elite is out right now, and products are shipping, and AMD will be close, but it still will take some while. And Lunar Lake just started production a few weeks ago. I think while we were at Computex, Intel said they just started production of Lunar Lake. So that's even out further. Mm-hmm. It's coming. It's not far away, but it's not here yet.
Well, you mentioned, or should I say, speaking of Strix, I want to throw this idea in there too, because it seems like AMD's getting a ton of design wins with Strix. I hear Asus is just going full hog with them, and Lenovo should as well. But Beefish writes in and says, Strix looks really good despite the branding hiccups, which is, I kind of think their AI naming is silly, but whatever. However, do you think AMD will be able to effectively bundle RDNA 4 with it en masse, though, next year? Also, how would Strix Halo be best segmented and marketed, in your opinions? And so this is a question where I kind of want to use it to ask you, how good do you think Strix looks, number one? But number two, do you think it will achieve getting a lot of RDNA 4 design wins? And I'll just jump in and say, I'm not so sure, but I wonder what you think.
I think, personally, Strix Point looks really good. I mean, it's basically AMD's tried formula. They have more cores. They have a pretty decent GPU. That's also something I'm looking forward to, because it's RDNA 3.5. I mean, AMD called it that way publicly, and so far we don't really know what 3.5 does better or different than 3. I mean, that's something to look out for. And Strix Point 4 nanometer APU looks really great from performance and efficiency point of view. AMD is not really doing anything crazy with it. It's more of an evolution than a revolution. But I feel like AMD doesn't really need more than an evolution, a good evolutionary step in their mobile lineup. And you said there will be a lot of volume, and then I feel like that was the only true drawback to AMD's mobile chips, where they would okay, here we have Rembrandt, this amazing chip, and it looks really amazing.
That took more than half a year to even show up.
It takes 6 months for products to be available, and then say, well, we have Phoenix, and it's amazing, but it still takes a couple of months for products to show up, and availability isn't amazing. And that's the part where AMD needs to increase their execution. If they are able to execute better on availability, on how many SKUs, how many CPUs they're getting to their OEMs, how quick they are available in the market, they already have good chips. And if the chip is even better than the last generation, I think that's all they need. Regarding RDNA 4, usually I have a pretty strong opinion on how I think next generation products will turn out, regarding CPUs or GPUs. But at this point in time, RDNA 4 is it's a mystery to me. I don't really know what to expect.
Yeah. I mean, I think, honestly, the first thing to give us confidence is the leaks that I put out about the PlayStation 5 Pro, because Sony's a different company than AMD, and this was internal stuff, and so they have no reason to lie to themselves.
Yeah.
And the fact that Sony is talking to partners about the PlayStation 5 Pro, which my understanding is it's some combination of RDNA 3.5 and 4, maybe a sprinkle of 5 stuff in there. They're talking about ray tracing being 4 times better than the ray tracing in the PS5 base, while having about not quite double the compute units. So you go, oh, so are they doubling ray tracing performance on RDNA 4?
Yeah.
If they can achieve that and then put that in a $500 product that has raster around a 7900 XT, which would suggest ray tracing performance close to a 4080, I think that's a really compelling product. I think that'll sell crazy well on desktop, actually. I just don't know if they'll get the design wins on laptop, though, because they just can't seem to get them ever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's no doubt that the GeForce brand is so much stronger than the Radeon brand right now. There's no question. And with first generation RDNA and with RDNA 2, I felt like AMD was on a really good path. and a lot more people not only bought Radeon, but it became more known, and it was suddenly people were arguing, is the 6800 XT better than the RTX 3080? And like there was a more heated discussion and more people on Radeon side. But over the past year, it's only been Nvidia. And I feel like the Radeon brand has decreased in visibility and in appeal. And everyone is like really, people are talking about, will AMD stop competing in the gaming market? And I mean, they won't, because there's still market share. There's still profits to be made, but AMD needs to find itself. I don't know. That's how I would put it. They need to find themselves. They need to really know what they want to do with Radeon, where they want to go, and where they put their efforts. Because Nvidia seems unbeatable right now, and especially with their, I mean, they've become the most valuable company. I mean, I think right now there's again second or third, but for a couple of days they even overtook Apple and Microsoft, and that tells you everything. Like there's such a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that I'm hearing that they're going to price Zen 5 aggressively on desktop.
Yeah.
That would tell you they're probably going to have a lot of supply. What's the point in making it cheap unless you're going to ship a lot of them to capitalize on the market share from that? I hear record-breaking shipments from AMD, not ever, but from AMD on a launch for Strix. And then you also hear about RDNA 4's top chiplet model being canceled. And I'm hoping at least this is a sign that AMD knows what they need to do well. They know that they bit off more than they could chew last year. And they're focusing how they're doing things. Like, hey, Strix Halo is going to need advanced packaging, so will MI350X. We cannot afford to do this gaming chip that costs $3,000. So let's cut that. Then we'll have a lot of Halo, a lot of Strix supply, and RDNA 4 can just try to crush the $500 market. Hopefully, this reducing in scope some of the things they're working on will allow them to find themselves again, because it was so weird how I feel like they did with RDNA 1 and 2, and they just seemed to forget it. I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, I completely agree. RDNA 1 and 2, it feels like AMD was on the path of beating, or at least, I mean, RDNA 2 did compete well with NVIDIA, and it felt like RDNA 3, when I heard about the chiplet architecture, I'm like, oh my God, they actually have the chance to beat NVIDIA. And then NVIDIA releases Ada Lovelace, which dominates everything, and RDNA 3 is kind of meh. And now RDNA 4, it feels like they have to find themselves again. What I have to say is that RDNA 1 also didn't compete in the high end. And that was by design. AMD decided, okay, we're not going to compete with the 2080. We're going to compete with the 2070 Max. And RDNA 1 was a really good generation. So it doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad generation. RDNA 4 could be a really, really good generation, even if AMD decides not to compete in a high end. They just have to focus properly. And if they're able to get a product out that performs well, has a good uplift in ray tracing, because right now we're at a generation where ray tracing actually starts being important. And I was always someone, first generation ray tracing was like, who cares? And second, I was like, it's a niche feature. But right now, I'm also in the market for a new GPU. I mean, I have a RX 6800 in my system, and I upgraded to a 1440p ultrawide monitor just a few weeks back, like one of the OLED, the Dell ultrawide wide OLED. And I realized I need a faster GPU, especially if I want to play if I want to play Cyberpunk with path tracing, if I want to play Alan Wake 2. And my next GPU, there's going to be a focus on ray tracing.
Like, it really will matter to you.
It's not the top thing, but I want good ray tracing performance. And if RDNA isn't able to deliver on that, RDNA 4, I won't have another choice than buy Blackwell.
Yeah, and I think hopefully that's what AMD's realized, or maybe Sony realized. I mean, let's be honest about this. Sony, AMD was working on RDNA 1 and 2 in many ways for the PlayStation 5. And Sony, I think I heard like Sony was kind of, it was going to be RDNA 1.5 ish, but then they looked at RDNA 1. They said RDNA 2 looks like that one's going to really be the more efficient one with higher clocks. Also, we'll get ray tracing support. And Sony said, we're waiting for ray tracing. I don't think Sony asked for a bunch of ray tracing performance. They just said, we'll take it. I feel like with how much I'm hearing Sony wants to market ray tracing with the PS5 Pro, maybe that's the thing that made them say to AMD, hey, get your shit together on this one, by the way. We really want it to do it well. And I think, I wonder if you agree with this statement. Like, I don't think people really would care if the 8800 XT, or whatever it's going to be called, is a 7900 XT, an XTX, or a 4080. Those are all within like 30% of each other in raster. What they care about is, because all of those I think can do 4K 120 in pure raster at decent settings, fine.
Yeah.
What people will want to see is, oh, now I can do Cyberpunk as well as a 4080 while not breaking the bank. And I think as long as you hit 7900 XT performance, which it might be better, everything else, I really think we got a lot of extra. I don't even know what to do with the raster on my 4090. It's ridiculous. So I don't know if people really need that in the mid-range so much as just a reasonable price and the ability to check all the boxes finally.
Yeah, you have to offer the right package. And I feel like with AMD, you also have to reconsider that people don't consider Radeon, the brand, as strong as GeForce. So you have to consider that when you're marketing your cards. And if you're going to market a mid-range card, you have to compete with price. You have to be like, okay, look, we're having a competitive raster performance. We have really strong ray tracing. We have a good amount of VRAM. And we are 15, 20% cheaper than Nvidia. And I feel like that's what it takes for AMD. People only buy AMD if it's cheaper. Or Radeon, not Ryzen. Ryzen is at a point where people buy Ryzen even if it's more expensive. But Radeon, people buy Radeon only when it's cheaper. And that's the truth right now. And it will only change if AMD continues to execute with Radeon again and it gets more visibility. But that's something I feel like AMD has to do. They have to bite the sour apple. I don't know if you say that in English, probably only in German. But you have to be like, okay.
But I get what it means.
Yeah.
I guess I'll ask this, and I have a hard out in a few minutes, so I don't have much time on this. So I'm kind of going to look for a speed run of this answer here. And I feel like we've been dancing around this question, but I mean, it seems like AMD's going to have better ray tracing. I hear the efficiency uplift with RDNA 4 could surprise us a bit, but they're not going for new levels of performance. Meanwhile, I think we pretty much know what the die configs of Blackwell are. I've got half of the info. Copite's put out stuff that lines up with mine. We know. The 5090, and we had reader mails about that, but I'm going to move through this just so everyone knows listening to this, we can finish this without a technical issue, hopefully interrupting us again. But the 5090 looks like, probably 40, 60% faster than the previous top die. But everything below that, I'm seeing a 15 to 25% uplift in performance, maybe at most. How do you see that panning out with Blackwell? Because I feel like if they're going to go for example, I'm not sure they will. If they're going to use the second die for the 5070, you're looking at a 16 gigabyte, $700, $800 card. They're going to use the 205 die for the 5070. They better make it no more than $500 with 12 gigabytes. How do you see this competition playing out? Do you see AMD as having a big opening here? Do you think we're underestimating how aggressive NVIDIA may be or overestimating how greedy they will be? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think AMD's biggest chance of an upset, if that's how you can call it, is if NVIDIA is greedy again with their lower tier cards, like we've seen last generations, where they step down each tier, literally, like they step down the dies a tier. You had like the chips that were like a 4060 should have been like a 4050 and so on. And only the upper tiers, only the 4090 was actually getting the performance boost. And if NVIDIA continues to be greedy like this, just like as you mentioned, if the 5090 is the only card with a decent uplift and all the other cards will be like...
In decent, you mean better than 20%.
Yeah. And that's the only way I feel like AMD can actually compete when they're not going to be greedy when NVIDIA is greedy. And I think there's a good chance that Nvidia will continue to be greedy in the gaming market because, first of all, they also know their mind share. They know how powerful GeForce is. And second of all, I don't know if Nvidia even cares anymore. I mean, look at the market cap difference between AMD and Nvidia. I mean, AMD's market cap is basically lost in Nvidia's market cap. And everyone talked about Nvidia becoming a AI first company and they're forgetting gamers. But I feel like at this point in time, they actually forgot gamers. I mean, not everyone in Nvidia, there's still a lot of people there, but from a strategy point of view, gaming is not important to Nvidia anymore.
I mean, I heard some of the Starfield issues were that their software team kind of took their eye off the ball, but they rung the alarm bells that they needed more support finishing Starfield's drivers for launch, and they just didn't get the focus that they thought they would get from upper management because they didn't really care. Now, look, you could say that was a mistake, but NVIDIA is the most valuable company on earth, so maybe who cares about Starfield? But at the same time, I just feel like I love that you said that. AMD's success will hinge on if they stop being greedy when NVIDIA is greedy. Yeah. All they have to do is that. And I think NVIDIA would even go, have it. Have the market share. We are making more money over here, which is why it's plausible they could actually succeed. The only thing that I think AMD has to worry about is I think NVIDIA would come back with a vengeance, like a Maxwell vengeance, if they needed to. If the AI bubble collapses, watch it. They'll come in hard to retake gaming. Yeah. But whatever, you miss every shot you don't take. And so I would say, even if they're worried and NVIDIA could just do that and it could be a war of attrition they'll lose, that as long AMD as your Radeon cards are making a 20, 30, 40% profit margin, you're not losing. And you have excess capacity at TSMC right now. So if NVIDIA pulls another Maxwell after Blackwell, then that's something to worry about. But that's something you can worry about then. And I would even put it a step farther. If AMD doesn't go hard this generation with RDNA 4 price performance, they are at risk of losing any chance of ever getting above 30% market share again. Yeah. Like they have to, They
have to take the chance and not just be like, okay, NVIDIA is setting the prices so high, we can kind of scoop in a little bit lower and have a similar high margin. But no, they have to attack. They have to be like, okay, NVIDIA is our competition. We want market share. How can we do that? Mm-hmm. And a 4 nanometer GPU, just like with Zen 5, on a process node that's not leading edge.
And look what they managed to do with Zen 5 die space. For all we know, RDNA 4 manages to get to that performance without being quite as big as we think. Maybe they can make it that cheap. So, well, here's to hoping, because we certainly need it. The only thing I'll say is I don't think either company's in a rush to launch them. I think these are Q4 products probably.
Or early next year.
Or next year. I've only been told 100% laptops will have them in Q1. I still don't have proof it'll be ready before that. All right. Well, before we get attacked by the server gods again, let us wrap up this video. Thank you again, Max, so much for coming on. Please tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me at youtube.com/highyield. And on Twitter, I think my handle is HighYieldYT for High Yield YouTube. But I'm pretty sure if you just Google me or go to YouTube, you will find everything.
And, of course, there'll be links to you in the description. And I'll also say, of course, thank you, everybody, for watching, for listening. Like the video, share the video, comment on the video, subscribe to Moore's Law is Dead on YouTube. That, in general, just makes it easier to get more and more deaths. We have a higher subscriber count. And so consider supporting us on Patreon. If I may say, I happen to know that Max is in the Patreon as well, and every now and then on the Moore's Law is Dead Discord comments. There's actually some really good conversations during Computex there. But, you can join us there at the lowest tier as well. And then, that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And have a good week, everybody.
Thanks.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carbon Cry and Carrie No Sugata as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels:
Brad Medlin, Gina Foles, Z Chits, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, Hardforum.com, SNES Chalmers, Jerome Ferriera, Valcom Alev, Jensen Wang, Gregory Sacker, Sarcastro, Evan Dinkle, Chris Rich, Compressed Earth Blocks, 3S Boy 08, Hal Booma, Shredbird, Toka, Greg Wanchik, Holden Mobley, Sammy Malas, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Blake, Franco Frederic, Jake223, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Stephen Hart, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Chrysantine, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Neithra Zink, Michael McGee, Greg, Patty Cakes, Amiable Chief, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, Aishould, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Attic, Judson N, Cameron, Wesley Sager, Henry Zhang, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Jamie Witters, Jeff Sedler, Loophole 35, Windstar, JSMMH, James I. Rader, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Pulse Media, Melodic Warrior, Dave Schultz, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Jones, Mai Sharona, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Win Wang, Hardland, Slushbot, Jason Angima, Joseph Kelly, Himsa Gung, Tails2299, Meal, Val Verga, John, Sisyphos771, For the Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, AC, Brian Wright, Michael Cozy, Dr. J Mad, Alex Vega, Free D, John Swin, Jola Martina, Kikum, Albergun, Solarized 80, Matthew Marlowe, Time Unveiled, Hoodat 42, Penta Winter, Rowan, McKicky, Cornster 671, Sputnik, Jeffrey Gentleman, Angel of Cake, Omega Doge, John Wick Boomstick, Nick, Zizamania, Curry King 3, Zombie Killer 777, Porcelain Oats, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.